Why, good day, you beautiful souls. This Wednesday experience is all about my rock bottom um, and my path from and out of anger and rage into an arrest and an attempt at suicide, and specifically how my dog Strider saved my life. So, this one is really, again, bringing back the more honest truth to the spiritual journey is that it doesn't come through hugs and kisses. Honestly, it starts through a lot of heartbreak and pain. And I feel it's really important to talk about this aspect of the journey because everyone gets so caught up in the goodness and the love and the light and the awakening, but all of us have to go through that darkness in order to really begin a search. And this experience and everything that's coming up in this video is all about how I got into the path through really just normal lifing and a regular experience for a lot of people. And I hope that it inspires those that go through similar journeys and have been through similar journeys, because I know when I've shared this testimony in front of others that it's helped them change their life, from some actionable steps to even more of like the judicial system, but also just the isolation that we can feel on this path when you start to awaken to things and those around you can't really witness you and see you. So I guess we'll dive right into it. Um, Let me know if the sound's working and everything's all good on your end. If you can, don't forget to smash that like. All right, cool. Everything's running on my end. So, to preface this one, I can't jump right into the moment of how my dog Strider saved my life because obviously one doesn't get to a point of suicidal ideation until you really reach a point of despair. And in my upbringing, I'm the youngest of four boys specifically, and raised by old school parents, like a lot of us. Their parents were the World War II vets, a lot of trauma that was passed on, to say the least. And I grew up in a home with a lot of violence, a lot of aggression, um, a lot of anger. And I personally wasn't witnessed. I was always a softie, always wearing my heart on my sleeve. And I was growing up in a home with a lot of just volatile people. And in order to manage that and survive, a lot of masking went on. And for myself, there was a lot of frustration. And if you've checked out the psilocybin darkness retreat, there's even some childhood sexual trauma that arose that was blacked out from my younger self, but it clearly was adding to the fuel of my fire that was my anger and my rage and my frustration and my loneliness. And I'm not going to put my parents under the bus. I forgave them years ago in my early 20s. But I grew up in a home where there was a separation that arose and then they got back together, and was really living in a home where two people were learning how to love each other again. And because of that, it just adds to the spice and the volatility that it does when you're trying to raise a family and work and all these other things. And for myself personally, it just fell through the cracks in terms of the love that I needed in order to actually feel alive in the purest sense of the word, to feel witness, to feel joy, to feel seen, to feel like I was enough and I was fulfilled. Because I was always questioning things, even as an early age. I think my first ponderings of death, which I'll dive into another video, was when I was like 6 or 7, like tops. Um, and I'd always been around death early on, just with my grandfathers both passing within a few years of each other, and just different aspects of, even the family cat passing and just things of that, where I was ahead of the curve, one could say. And considering I had 3 older brothers and the oldest was 13 years my elder, I was exposed to a lot, arguably a lot too early. Like, if I had to be straight up about it, but that is the path um, of this type of life I've lived. I've always been exposed to things a lot earlier than when I was probably ready to handle it. But as I have come to know, that God doesn't put anything in your life unless you can handle it. So I've managed to survive. But when it came to it, you know, I went through a lot of just betrayals early on, and the core ones obviously were from my family and from my parents. And you know, started off with my father, then my mother, then my brothers, and I've had like violent stints with some of my brothers where they tried to take my life. And my friends became my family, like very early on. And I went through the whole nicotine smoking phase at like 13, 14. That was only like 2 weeks, but it was enough to know that I was like, "Oh, it's not my vibe." But from there, that's when I was exposed to drinking and smoking and having sex freshman year in high school and things of that nature. Like, I was just on that path of just doing my own thing because I was always outside of my home. Ultimately, the danger of this upbringing and what a lot of people go through is that when your home isn't a safe space, you seek that safety outside of yourself and with others. And for myself, it was with friends from a completely different socioeconomic class, from a completely different lifestyle. And it exposed me to a lot of danger early on. I had the first time I've had a gun held to my head, I was 15, and it was from a drunk kid, rich kid, who was shit faced and borderline blacked out, driving and just right in my face. So I'd gone through a lot of crazy stuff, and this isn't even like a drop in the ocean of the wildness that has been my life. But the major betrayals that caused a lot of the rage now started to creep into the realm of like my friend groups and the outlets that I had for my rage and my aggression through sports. I went on a soccer trip in Paris, and we played in Spain in San Sebastian. It was when we were in Spain that I was assaulted by one of the fathers, punched in the face, trying to defend one of my friends at the time, like childhood friend, growing up from like first grade, same class, all the way up to middle school. And he was pretty shit faced himself, and he had gone through childhood sexual abuse from a priest. And I was defending him because that other father was slapping the shit out of him, like grown man hitting a child. And when I got in the way and told him to stop, he just cold clocked me right in the face. Didn't go down though, hard body. Gotta take credit where I can. But that fucking broke me. Because it was shortly after that that I went from being like captain on the team to essentially one of the captains on the team, um, like assist leader, top four in goals, like just in soccer. It was my outlet, running, getting all that aggression and tension out, um, to just really getting pushed off the team. Um, and what really broke my heart even further was just like I already had a huge issue with adults just from my own family betrayals and seeing just the political life and how that kind of manifested. And I saw a bunch of the nasty House of Cards type of stuff at a young age, just seeing how toxic and gross some people were with power. That when I had that assault happen, there was an officer in the States, like one of the kids' dads, that was witness to all that. And he just looked at me, and that's going to play a role till later. But he just looked at me and was just like in disbelief, but didn't say anything. No one said anything. It took a 16-year-old kid to curse out and shame two adults, two drunk adults, his wife as well, of just how terrible their behavior was. And they tried to hide it from my parents. It was a whole bunch of stuff, but it turned into like one of the first real like heartbreaks that I went through that caused a lot of that anger and rage just to just blow up. And, I should always preface this, I was a great student. I was a great athlete. I'm very good at poker face just because of the home that I grew up in, where you can't show any of those things, or it was going to be even more rage, volatility, violence. And not, I would say no one knew back then. And maybe some had an idea, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell anyone what was going on in my life. I just truly felt alone, because I'd seen and been let down by so many adults around me before that when a lot of this stuff started to really bubble up even more, I just kind of absorbed myself in my life and my world. And I've been working since I was like 14. So by that time, it's like 16, I lose a sport, go through a crazy injury. I'm no longer having that physical outlet, and I just start getting even more reckless in my behavior because I have freedom. You know, when you have old parents and you're the youngest of four and you do all the things right, you have a lot more leeway in things. And I definitely took advantage of that. So that aspect of my friends being my family was another heartbreak because kids I grew up playing soccer with for almost a decade um, went through a lot of crazy betrayals and racist stuff. And then same thing with kids I grew up in my local area. So I really lean into a lot of like I guess you would say like my private school friends in high school. And they also lived a very different life and just a lot of reckless drunk driving, a lot of late nights, a lot of parties, and just always like to express to people like my high school experience was like most people's college in terms of what I was exposed to and the stuff that I was doing in the crazy late nights and early mornings, you could say. Um, but all of this really just culminated throughout into senior year, and it's New Year's Eve. And the spiritual, mystical aspect of this story is how it started. I had all the alcohol and all the things ready to go, and I'm getting ready to go pick up my homies and do my thing. And we're gonna pick up some of my friends from up here, and one of them was again like a long-term friend. Um, and I walk off my porch, and I see a cop car go by, and just something just blurted out from within me. Ah, my night starts with you; it will end with you. And that walk to the car, I was consciously like, and verbally out loud was like, "What the fuck? Like, no, I don't want that. Why did that come out?" And it kinda had me, like, shook for that whole walk to the car and kind of, like, a few minutes in driving to go pick up my friends, and just memory hold it. Once the homies are together, it's kinda just that boy energy, and I should say that, like, that whole night and how it led up was determined, from that future self, kinda calling it out in that moment, because we fast forward to the evening, one of my really close, like, childhood friends at the time wanted to go out and get some Jack in the Box. And we were at a big house party, and I was just hammered. You know, I'm outside throwing up outside of my car for like 30 minutes. People are checking on me, being like, "You okay?" And then for me, that danger of having your friends being your family and that outlet for that safety and really that validation was just me just sucking it up and saying, "No, no, 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 I'm good," even though I was far from it. And also just not being around loving people who could see that and would see that and step in and be like, "No, you're not okay. Like, come on, let's go take care of you." Part of the mask that I wore was that I got it. Everything's okay. And that lack of vulnerability was, was the cause of a lot of this. So my friend and I go to Jack in the Box. He's gonna throw up in my car. I whip out and then boom, sirens. And then this is where shit gets wild and cinematic. And I should preface all of this right here. My entire criminal history has been vacated. You can look it up, won't be there because of my own aspect of the judicial process of having 10 years good time and then going through all the legal framework to actually get it removed from my record since it was a nonviolent offense. And I should say that that is one of the most inspiring things for people out there is that you can have these things off your record because I have also been on the other side of that coin of having that stigma and still going to college, still getting a good job outside of, once I graduated, but I was turned down from a few really amazing positions because of that aspect of a criminal history. And I've seen all aspects of how this can impact people's lives from the youth that I've mentored and their family. But I've also seen the power of this testimony and how some of the fathers and some of the mothers that had their own criminal history were able to go through their process of getting it vacated from their record and then really just transforming their families' lives. So we'll jump back to it. Just want to get that little PSA out. Um, so yeah, it turns into like essentially like a hit and run situation. I leave, cop can't follow because his car stalled. I go down to the ground, outside after my friend scattered. We pulled into a parking lot, I should say, and then he ran when another cop pulled up. And then I tried to leave again. Cops came. I dodged it so I could just like pull up on a curb, got out of the car, surrendered. And the Peter you see before you is very different. The thumbnail kind of shows like I had shaved head back then and I was a beefcake, I was like 210. So it's like, wide neck, big body. They thought we were drug dealers. So when I surrender myself and, hands behind the head, I'm kneeling on the ground, I get tased like 13 times and I get my ass beat by the cops, like just straight up, like foot to the pavement, just beating the shit out of me. Wasn't resisting. Um, and I could have gone this whole path of suing and countersuing because someone was throwing out their trash and saw the whole thing. And their detectives actually told me that, and it was just one of those things where, like, I just wanted to be beyond it, but when I was in the ambulance, because I needed to make sure that my heart wasn't gonna stop, that same officer who saw me get assaulted in Spain peeked his head in there, and it was, like, the damn near same look on his face, and he just went, "Peter?" And I just looked at him, and with just kinda like a rage and a sadness, um, because it's like, "Fuck." And at the time, I wasn't really upset with anything. It was more so just like, damn, like my friend ran. All I was just My rage has just been like boiling over. I was in a numb and a stupor because everything was just going on and I was still pretty drunk. But um, we fast forward a few weeks from there, and it's all kind of like settling in. The first charges are happening. I've already gone through the pressing things. I had felony, essentially charges that they were going to put me through. And in the first talks with the prosecutor, they were going to shoot for 35 years on my first offense. And the craziest part is, again, I had just turned 18, and I almost missed one of the most important parts of my notes. All of that happened, New Year's Eve, but all of it happened right after I led like one of the most potent spiritual retreats ever for my high school. And I was the rector leader, and it was actually where I performed my first exorcism. Um, but there was a old timer that had gone to like the past like 60 years, and he said he hadn't felt anything as potent and seen the youth like cry and like in terms of people's testimonies and things his entire time like assisting and facilitating with this encounter retreat. So low key, I know that this was all like a spiritual aspect, like I had felt like, oh, this felt really right. I really liked it. And then boom, you have that catalyzing event go down in terms of like the trial by fire and the truest testament that God puts us through in those challenges. So, you know, we bring it back. I've been reflecting in all of these things, and the weight of the criminal charges really start to hit. And I was home alone. Parents were at some political event, and it was shortly after the first article came out that first black judge of Snohomish County's son arrested on felony charges, and my name was just dragged through the mud. And I specifically remember reading the comments online and how much hatred people were showing me who obviously didn't know me, but just saying the most horrendous things, attacks on my character, telling me I deserved everything that I get. And, at that point, you start to believe it when you don't have anyone and you're super alone and you're going through all those changes. I really felt the most despair in my life. And like a true 90s kid, I was sitting in the darkness one night after reading all that and just contemplating life. And at that time, I wanted to go to medical school, and I was just like, well, that's done. My future's over. And that slippery slope of despair and rumination just started to accelerate and spiral. And I'm sitting there looking at the fireplace, and the room is just dark and it's just being illuminated by the little fire that I had. And yeah, my parents were out at some political event. Who knows when they were going to get back? And I was just essentially talking myself into killing myself, that no one would miss me, no one would love me. I've ruined my life anyway. It would be easier for my parents. It would and just all the nastiest things. And for myself, it started to take like the darkest note when I was going over what I was going to write in my note. Um, because then it brought and forced me to really bring up everything that I had been holding on to in my youth. And speaking on the betrayals and the moments where I feel like no one could hear me and no one could see me. And when I had finished kind of writing the note in my head and I was just like, "Yeah, I can write that." I was like, "Well, when do I wanna do this?" And mind you, this is all just in silence, just with the emo darkness and the fire. Then I knew how I was gonna go out. I had a liter or a handle of vodka, and I had a bunch of old prescription drugs from when I got my wisdom teeth taken out my freshman year, and, like, oxys, Percocets, and codeine, and I was just gonna take a cocktail and down the 5th, wedge myself up in my bed, and I was just envisioning all of this too, like, with the pillows and the cushion of the couch that I had in my room, and I was just gonna Jimi Hendrix it because I love Jimmy, and I was like, "Well, even if the pills don't stop my heart, I'll probably just vomit in my sleep and suffocate, and I'd rather just go out in my sleep." Because I had already gone down the whole, like, "Do I hang myself? I don't know, like, I don't have a gun in the house. I'm kind of a wimp when it comes to paper cuts, let alone slitting my wrists, so, like, I wasn't really gonna go that route." But everything had gone through the head, and the moment that I was gonna get up to go get the pills, get the paper, and go up to my room for the last time, um, my golden retriever Strider just bolted up out of his sleep. He was over by the front door, so he was, like, out of sight, and he was snoring, like, he's the bestest of boys. He was a cute dog, but he's one of those, like, British golden retrievers, so his shoulders were like a man's, and when he stood up, he was, like, taller than, like, 5'2", 120 something pound golden retriever and athletic boy. Um, but the moment that I was getting up, like, pressing up off the couch, he just bolted up out of his sleep and just threw himself, in my lap. Front paws just, like, on my hips, on my quads, and he just leaned so heavy into me, and it was in that moment that I realized, looking at his just cute face, and he's just sitting there with a big old smile on his face with his tongue out, that just, like, a single thought just kind of, like, broke through the clutter and the frustration because I was at this point just like, "Come on, man, move, get off me, like, go away." It was just like that still inner guru, that Sadhguru, that inner voice that was just like, "You forgot about him." And, the plot twist of Strider is that when my parents were going through, like, their near empty nest because I was gone with sports and working so much, that they thought that, I needed a friend, and for my 15th birthday when I wanted a guitar, my dad got me a dog and bought himself a guitar. Uh, I wish that was a cliche story, but, like, that's real life. So I was actually really resentful that I got a dog because that was a responsibility that I had to take care of him, and the full circle moment was it was that little love bug and that little ball of light and angel that reminded me that I had a love in my life and that I wasn't alone. And as you can see, this stuff still gets me really emotional because I have no doubt in my mind I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that dog. Because and I was looking through pictures to get the thumbnail before this yesterday, and I was, like, just missing him, because he was the best dog. I think that's the blessing that dogs are. They really do protect us in the physical, um, and he protected me from myself and that negativity and that despair, and it really was that just aha moment of just like, "Oh, you idiot." Of course, this life is worth living because what would happen to him? They wouldn't take care of him like you take care of him. He would miss you. And at that time, that was the only living being who I felt like could actually and did love me. And the beauty of dogs is that they're unconditional love. It really is just a blessing that they play in our lives. And, I just hugged him and just wept. I don't know how long, but he just sat there with his little cute face. Um, and he just leaned in, so that point on, I never looked back and have never had a single type of like ideation type of thought since then. And I know it was because of that inspiration that he played in my life and in my heart. And ultimately, when he ended up passing, there was a really beautiful moment of that night. I saw him just like in a field um, with Yeshua. And that was kind of like the first moment that I'd actually seen, like, and known in my heart that he was like, oh, yeah, he's with God. He's good. Um, but yeah, like I share that tale because it really is like the start of what a lot of these next few Wednesday experiences are going to be about. Kind of like the dark tales of the spiritual path that build up to all of that in which you see before you. And a lot of people leave sweet comments saying that you're so calming and you're so loving, and people that know me in person you know tell me often I have golden retriever energy because I am a generally just happy, loving person and upbeat and positive. But when people, I should say, and when I open up about my life to others, it makes a lot of people just really just shook and in disbelief because they can't imagine the angry version of myself. And at times, it seems so distant and so long ago that it's hard to think about it myself, but it came through a lot of heartbreak and pain. And that blessing that dogs serve in our lives is just being those infinite sources of just unconditional love really is life changing. And I know for a fact that it can save your life. As they say, dogs protect you in the physical, cats protect you in the spiritual. And I've been blessed to have, little furry angels in my life because most humans have failed it or failed me in that sense. But that whole arrest and that whole story really does lead into my catalyzing event when I had, the sentencing and all these other things go off. But I got to save that for next week. Um, yeah. And I just hope that whoever's hearing this, if you're going through something difficult, that it gets better. I can't say that I was 100% on my despair and ruminating and dwelling and being, in that emo sense of just really diving into the negative. But a lot of that just comes with the process of grieving, is that sometimes you just kind of go back and it may seem like it's a spiral, but that moment of recognition and release that, like, yeah, I'm not alone, that I have a being in my life that loves me and has never not, you know, that was life changing. And there's, it may sound like cheesy or weird to some people, but like, I've had grandparents pass away young, and even the ones that were a little later in life, like has been no greater heartbreak of a death in my life um, than my dog, honestly. And like my father passed away, and I don't say that to like come off as cold, but the level of like love and adoration that I have for my dog and how he saved my life. Because just knowing that, like, when we're in our darkest and deepest moments of just despair and being lost and getting caught up in the negativity of the mind and the temptations of the dark, all it takes is like a single ray of light to guide you out of it. And for those that don't have that type of love in their life, know that I love you. And I've said that to strangers who have been going through it too, and clients and students in my life that have been on that precipice. And just know that, like, unconditional love and just being there for people to listen and witness them is all it takes. And then for me, this is the importance of just checking in on your friends. I've lost a childhood friend to suicide, and during the COVID years, and he just thought he was alone. And what hurt the most was that, we were hanging out a few weeks prior, but that reassurance that was given in that face-to-face talk didn't matter when he was experiencing that moment of temptation. Because when he was in that moment of temptation, he was alone. And I just know I would have been right there if I was too. To stride out. Yeah. And I'll touch on again what kind of comes from all this next week, and the catalyst and the fallout of the arrest saga. And I also just want to just mention, it just feels really pulled to say it, but there's never an end in your story until you give up. And I know that for a fact. I have played dang near every stereotype of young black male, and all the different violence and volatility at home, and all those stereotypes of arrested young and all these things. And I'm here and have impacted a lot of lives for the better. I don't know, my story's just getting started. Excuse me, body agrees. But with that, I feel complete. I don't know if there's anything else I really need to say. Yeah. May the fruit of knowledge offer a seed, and in that seed may your love and intuition give life and nourishment. For a tree shall grow, and in its shade may you find peace, and offer peace to all who ask. Namaste. I love you so much. Thanks for dropping in. Like, share, comment, let me know what you thinking, what you like, and I'll touch base with you Sunday. Peace.